and welcome to our second Zooming word plays. We are in our 14th season. I am Kate Dudding, one of the producers of Story Circle at Proctor's, and I welcome you on behalf of my producing partner, Alden Joe Doolittle. Our topic today is truths and lies. And we have a variety of stories, different story types as well. We have personal stories, we have folk tales, we have a literary story, a legend, and a Norse myth. Now, to tie these together slightly, I asked each of our tellers, if your story was a color, what would it be? And Margaret French, our first teller, said gold. Her story is a personal story called Challenges in Contemporary Living. Coming to you live from Saratoga Springs, Margaret French.
Thank you, Kate. Now, the topic, truth and lies, I thought failure to tell the truth and manipulation was close enough. Now, when my sons were young, I wanted them to learn how to do chores. You know, we didn't have any wood piles or cows, so they couldn't learn to chop wood or milk cows. But it seemed to me there must be other things that were important for them to learn. Now, when they were very little, 3, 4, 5, they'd be playing and the kids in the neighborhood would come by to play. So I got them to do housework for money. Now this worked pretty well. They don't do a good job, but they're cheap. And it keeps them busy for a couple of hours. But I can only imagine how it would be when they went home to their parents at lunchtime and they would say, hey, look, Mommy, I swept the kitchen floor in Mrs. Madera's house, my former name, and I put the toys away and I dusted the coffee table and I have 7 cents. None of the neighbors objected, probably because the kids were out of their hair for a couple of hours. Now, modern day mothers may object, modern day fathers may object, because modern day parents, they don't let their 3 and 4 and 5-year-olds wander off to a neighbor's house without any supervision. And they probably object to the idea of being put to work for pennies. But in those days, people didn't object. I mean, if the kid's out of your hair and the kid's happy, all was well. What can I say? Some of us were a lot more shallow in those days. Now, when they got a little bit older, say 6 or so, I had a row of pink shrub roses along a sidewalk, and they were always full of Japanese beetles. So I suggested they might like to earn money, a penny for every 5 Japanese beetles that they put in a bottle. And that went over pretty well too. And my roses never looked so well. Eventually, they got tired of putting Japanese beetles in jars, but it didn't matter because fall came and the beetles were gone. So my oldest son, Paul, turned 10, and I really wanted him to do something useful in the house. Now, by his nature, Paul was and is a lovely, sweet, gullible person. So I knew the plan because he liked complicated schemes. You know, he got older. He was one of those people who loved Star Wars, Dungeons and Dragons, ended up working for IBM. You know the type. So I prepared in those long ago days before computers. Got a bunch of index cards, bought some graph paper, got a box of colored pencils, and I got a box of stars. And then I prepared everything and I went to him and say, hey, Paul, I have this great idea. I call it Challenges in Contemporary Living. Now, on each index card, I have a chore, a challenge. Depending on its level of difficulty, I've assigned points to it. Now, as you successfully complete the challenges, you win the points, and I graph it out with colored pencils on the graph paper. And the graph paper will be on the refrigerator, and you get stars. Now, I knew the stars were the best part. First of all, I knew my son, Paul. And I had spread the stars out on the table. You know, red, green, blue, silver, and gold. And I knew that I personally would do almost anything for stars too. I learned to read because of stars. Teacher puts a star on the page, I learned to read that page. So Paul, he looked at this all and he was hooked. He did laundry, 10 points. He did vacuuming, 6 points. He learned to make the most fabulous birthday cakes for his brothers that you have ever seen. They were the talk of the neighborhood, 25 points. The graph paper, he had the most beautiful line graphs that you have ever seen, and he got stars. The best, of course, are the gold stars. I always knew that. I still will do almost anything for a gold star. And this was one of the most successful acts of manipulation that I have ever attempted in my life. And I was very pleased with it. He was happy. He didn't seem to know that this was shameless manipulation. So a few years went by. His brother Raj got to be 10. And I thought to myself, I want him to do these chores also. It worked for Paul. And I got a box of stars, a brand new box, and I spread everything out on the table, and the stars were sparkling there on the kitchen table. And I said, hey, Raj, I have this great idea. I call it Challenges in Contemporary Living. And I explained it all. And he looked at me in a way that he still looks at me pretty often. And he said, you want me to do the laundry? It had all fallen apart. I knew it was never going to work. He didn't even care about stars. And a couple of years later, when my youngest son turned 10, I didn't even bother to try. To this day, because my kids never forgot about this for some reason. To this day, my son Raj will say, I'm so glad I didn't fall for it. He was brothers,
Oh,
all
no.
that. Thank you.
Oh, God.
Thank you so much, Margaret. That story was pure gold.
Oh,
Do I get a star?
Yes, yes.
Gold stars.
Oh, there we go. That was a star.
We don't have stars, but we have hearts.
Oh, we have.
Well done.
Oh, thank you, Claire.
Well done.
Moving forward, our second teller. We have a plethora of Kates today. Is plethora applicable for the two? We have more than one Kate today, and Kate Danaher is our next teller. She specializes in Irish folk tales. So she said, of course, you wanted a color for my story? Of course, it's the colors of the Irish flag, green, white, and gold. So Kate, please tell us your story about Mick the Fiddler.
Nick the Fiddler. Yes, it starts in Ireland, of course. And I'll say before I start that I only know what I heard. I only heard what was said. And a lot of what was said was lies. I'll start with that. I would say they might be. And you can see if you can find the lies in this story. Well, there were also those who came back from America. Those who only went over to see the time. Now, such a man was Mick the Fiddler. He said the climate over in America didn't agree with him, and he got a crick in his neck from looking up at the tall buildings. And the day before he sailed for America, Mick the Fiddler helped his brother and his brother's wife, Moll Phil, to set the barley in the high fields, and he was home again in time to cut it. And his brother went to the railway station to meet him. And when they got off, and Mick the Fiddler got off at the sidecar at the gable of his own house, he looked around and he said, "So, this is Ireland." And he only gone 6 months. And he had a crease in his trousers that would shave a gooseberry for you. And the tie he had around his neck, I wouldn't like any bull to see it. He didn't know anyone that came to meet him, not even those who were in the same book as him going to school. And he walked into the kitchen and he was very taken aback at what he saw sitting at the hob of the fire. And he said, "Say, Moll, what's that long-tailed bugger in the corner? Wishamik, says she, is it how you don't even know the cat?" But of all the people to come back from America, Mick the Fiddler gave the best value, for he answered all questions appertaining to the nature of New York. And the house would be full every night, packed full, and Moll Phil and the brother all pusses on him, for they usedn't to get to bed till all hours. And the other thing, Moll Phil, she was very house proud. And her kitchen was shining. You could see yourself in the delf in the dresser. You could eat off the kitchen floor. And it killed her down dead to see us all traipsing in every night, bringing in the mud of the locality on our shoes. Well, Mick's first night home, he was telling us about the boat going over. And he said they must have saved the company a fortune in food, because it was 4 days before they could keep anything down. And in those days, all emigrant boats pulled into Ellis Island in New York Harbor, where all the passengers had to undergo very strict examinations. A newspaper would be put in front of you and you would be expected to read a skein out of it. Now, they were all good scholars going at that time, but there would be the occasional man that wouldn't know a bee from a bull's foot up on the gable of a house. And he'd be questioned to see how the talk was by him. Like he'd be asked, "What is a cloud?" or to explain a mountain. Well, this fella one of the Hannah Finns up near Lou Bridge. Oh, he made a terrible fist of the reading. Oh, the poor fella, I suppose he got very nervous. And the American was getting flustered and trying to get him through. And he said, look, can you just tell me what a lake is? Oh, said the fella, a lake. Oh, I know, I can and will tell you what a lake is. It is a hole in the arse of a kettle. I don't know if he ever got through. But anyway, Mick told us when it came to the medical part of the examination, oh, you'd be prodded and poked the same as if you were a bullock at a fair. The way they look through the hair on your head and under your fingernails. Mick said you wouldn't be one bit surprised if they looked up a certain place to see was your backbone straight. True. Well, all the clothes had to be taken off and you put them in a little caboose, a little locker, and you walked in naked to the doctor. And Mick said that when he was walking in, who came running up with one of the cases of Trunona, making a fig leaf out of his two hands, you know, and crying, mad with fright. Where's my trousers? Says the lady doctor that's inside. Oh, Mick said the Caseys were ever virtuous. Well, Mick also said it's a shame that he didn't cover his face because that way she wouldn't know him when he had to go back in. But anyway, Mick's first job over was drawing water in a big barrel in a four-horse car for baptizing babies. Oh, it seems the population of New York was mounting at the time. And in the chapel where Mick worked, he said there were 4 curates, their sleeves rolled up to their elbows and they baptizing all day long and the water flowing out the front door. Well, the same as here, babies were baptized at the bottom of the church, but wakes were held in a funeral parlor. And Mick was at one of these wakes, and he told us that the man was laid out in a coffin, you know, with all dressed up in a new suit, no habit on him, the same as if he was going to a dance. And Mick said, wasn't it an awful shame to be burying the man in the new suit? Until someone called him aside and said that there was no back to the suit. So Mick said, I can tell you the Yanks would teach you how to live. The wake he was at, it was a Dennehy boy from the butt of the Paps, and oh, God help us, he fell under a train at Penn Station. And Mick took the day off to go to the wake. And then he decided to stop into a speakeasy on the way. It was during Prohibition, where he's struck up a conversation with an American-born curryman. They used to call them narrowbacks. They weren't the bulky Irishmen, you know. And the narrowback, he was a very nice fella. And Mick was telling him about the wake. And he's the narrowback, the American. He said, well, he didn't know Dennehy from the sky over him, but he'd go along to the wake just for the fun of it. So he went to the wake. They set off, and on their way there, they stopped into a few more saloons. And by the time they got there, they were spifflicated, paralytic, and they missed the funeral parlor by inches. What did they do? But they went in next door and they knelt down, and mustering up all the reverence they could, they began to pray. And then when they got up and they were leaving, the American said to Mick, well, says he, I didn't have the privilege of knowing your friend, but he certainly had a fine set of teeth. So, well, next we have, I'll never forget. Skyscrapers. And there was a man there that had been on an excursion to Cork, and he said, well, now, Mick, would these skyscrapers be as tall as one of the spires of St. Finbarr's Cathedral in Cork? God help your head, said Mick. They go down that far in New York before they ever think of going up. And they go up so high, he said, they had to take a brick off one chimney to let the moon pass. And they go up so quick, he said, that one morning Mick said that he was going out to work and they were digging the foundations for a high-rise apartment. And when he got home that evening, the tenants were being evicted for non-payment of rent. That's true. That part I know is true. Well, there were so many questions to Mick about the topography of New York that Mick decided he would draw a map. And as there was no piece of paper in the house big enough, what did they do? But they brought out the ashes, from the fire and put them onto the flagstone of the fire. And with the top of old Dundonovan's walking cane, Mick drew an outline of the island of Manhattan, 10 miles long, 3 miles wide, bought by the Dutch from the Red Indians for less than $50. Don't you think, says Mick, there were bargains going in those days? And with the top of old Dundonovan's cane, he drew the avenues going north and south and the streets going across. And he said that the buildings between two streets were called a block, and that there were 8 blocks to the mile, if you could believe him. And then he began to show us places. He showed us Chinatown, and he showed us the Bowery. Oh, and he said there was a Kenmare Street in Chinatown. Weren't they cut short for names? Well, then he showed us Hell's Kitchen and Riverside Drive and Columbus Circle, Central Park West. And these places were as familiar to us as the townlands of our own parish from being written about in the letters home. And then one fella there is a little fella, he said, would you ever know where my sister Hannah is in the middle of all that ashes? Oh, Mick said, do you know her number? Oh, I do, he said, 240 West 84th Street. Oh, he says, right there. He points with the cane between Amsterdam and Broadway. That's where she hang out. Oh, the little fellow was thrilled. Well, now, all this night, through the night here, the cat, he sat up on the hob the whole time, but then he began, the cat was a female. She began to wash her front. Then she arched her back and she opened her mouth wide, and you'd swear she was laughing at the whole event. But the dog now, he was lying on the floor a bit down from the fire. If only he knew half of him was inside in the Hudson River. But there he was, with his snout down between his 2 front paws, just a few inches away from the ashes of Mick's map. And he was barking in his sleep. Oh, isn't it lovely to hear a dog barking in his sleep? The little sounds they make, like, whoo, 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 right? Like whatever little images are running through his mind, like, I suppose that he pictures himself running after sheep in a mountain, or maybe mixed up in some other carry-on. Well, anyway, the dog, he took a deep breath, filled himself up. You could nearly count his ribs. And then all of a sudden, he let it all down his nose in one snort and demolished 3/4 of an acre of skyscrapers. And you could see the little particles of ashes rising up between you and the light of the lamp. And you could see the look on Mal Phil's face, and it was as craggy as the map of South America. Well, there were Brezhnahans there. They had brothers in the Bronx. Sheehan so had sisters in Staten Island, and Kyo's who had sisters in Queens. And they were, not to mind those from Brooklyn, Yonkers, and the Jersey Shore. Well, 'twas like a pantomime, everyone wanting to know where were their relations. But Mick told them, as these places were outside of the island of Manhattan, up the Hudson and down the bay, turned to Coney and Rockaway, that the chairs had to be pulled back and more ashes brought out to add to the map. So then in the middle of all this activity, what happened? But the cat hopped off the hob, marched down Fifth Avenue. You would think it was Patrick's Day. And we began to call the cat, in case she'd bring all the ashes, on the pads of her foot around the house, right? And of course, the dog woke up when he heard us talking to the cat, kitty, 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 come here. Think the dog thinking he was being left out of something, Well, he got up, walked over, sat down in the middle of the Bronx and began to wag his tail. Well, now the ashes began to rise, and Mick the fiddler knew the fat was in the fire, and he started to call the dog, nice doggy, nice doggy, nice doggy. Well, the dog, he was a big, soft half-fool of a sheepdog, and to show his friendship, the more Mick spoke to him, the friendlier he got. And the friendlier he got, the more his tail went round like a propeller, churning up the ashes until you couldn't see your finger in front of your face. Right. And out of this dense fog came Moll Phil with the sweeping brush. And as I was the nearest to her, I got the first crack of it. She says, I'll give you the Bronx and I'll give you Chinatown. And the same as if she was the mounted police, she cleared out of the kitchen. And she cleared us all out of the kitchen. And we spilled out the front door like muddy water out of a bucket. And bringing to an abrupt end Mick the Fiddler's graphic description of the island of Manhattan in the state of New York, in the continent of America. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Thank you very much, Kate Danaher, for taking us back to the old country with their look at the new country. That's a horrible accent there, but somehow I've been reminded of the Blarney Stone, just a tad, and I didn't think this.
Good.
And I didn't think I'd learn a new word. I learned a few, but spifflicated, I particularly.
Yes, spifflicated is good. I love that word.
Yes. So thank you very much, Kate. Our next storyteller is Fran Combs-Berger, who grew up in Tornado Alley in Oklahoma. She is sharing with us a personal story, and the colors she wanted identified with her story are cardinal red and navy blue. Her story is called Tricks I Played on My Twin Sister, and that very same twin sister is in our audience today.
Oh.
Please share your story with us, Fran.
Hello, is everybody swept away with that broom? Well, there's a reason that I chose navy blue and cardinal red. Because here we go, back in 1967, we're at the World Series and the Cardinals are playing the Boston Red Sox. And here we are in rural Oklahoma with a bunch of bored teenagers who have bets to place and no money to add to those bets. So what is it? It's more like truth or dare. My friends and I, or our friends and I, and my twin and I were gathered together and we decided we'd bet on who would win the World Series. And I was all for the Cardinals. Yay, Cardinal Red! And Evie, my twin, she was for the Boston Red Sox. Well, they're red, white, and navy blue. And they both have regular red and they both have regular white. So I chose cardinal red for this story. And navy
Go
blue.
Red Sox.
Yeah, go Sox. Yeah, well, as if. Fall 67 last game, 4-3 Cardinals. Well, as I said, there was not much money flowing around when you're 15 years old and you're betting on the World Series, but there was a truth or dare. And that truth or dare was this. Whoever's team lost, you had to get on your hands and knees as the loser and push a pencil with your nose for one block. That seemed like a really good idea in September when we made that bet. Everybody agreed on it. We had a dirt road in front of our house. No problem. What we didn't know is the city had improvements planned. And by the time the day of the series came, we had gravel over our dirt. And I said, you have to do it anyway. And she said, no, I don't. I'll hurt myself. Yes, you do. No, I don't. Yes, you do. No, I don't. And then she said, darn, Red Sox lost anyway. I'm just going to do it. And so she put on a pair of jeans and she got down on her hands and knees and I gave her a pencil and I was really please stop. No, they lost. Please stop. No, they lost. And this went on for a full block in 25 minutes. It was brutal. And by the time she stood up, there were holes in her knees, of the knees of her jeans, scrapes all over her knees, and her hands, they were bloody. I was so upset, but she was triumphant because she did it. And so mad at her Red Sox for losing. That put me quiet for a while. I was a mischievous sort. And I didn't really feel very good about this, but she felt triumphant, even though she was a loser. And I guess I was a loser too. But that didn't hold me back for long because I had this boyfriend and he worked and lived out on a dairy farm. And this is the other trick I played on my sister. I knew that he was saving up for a brand new truck. And they'd been dating quite a while. And she went out to that farm all the time. And he taught her to drive a tractor. I was really jealous because I wanted to drive a tractor, but he wouldn't spend the time to teach me to drive a tractor. She could drive a tractor. She got to do all kinds of things. I didn't really have a boyfriend at the time that I didn't get to do. And he was coming this Saturday and he was going to give her a ride in this brand new truck. And she and I talked about it all day long. We were so excited. And I was in the bathroom helping her get ready. Does anybody remember ratting your hair? It was a terrible thing we did, teasing or ratting. We
yes.
back brush it until it stuck out. And then we took a can of hairspray and spray it. And while it was wet, we would shape it into this big bubble. There was little curls at the end. And it just, you looked like you had this giant helmet head, but you did it on purpose. It was worn to proms, on dates. It was worn everywhere. So she was busily back brushing her hair when my little brother ran up and said, he's here, but she didn't hear it. I ran out to the living room and I thought about what I was going to do. I had my little brother and my little sister busy in the bathroom talking to Evelyn while she teased her hair saying, we'll let you know when he gets here, because I paid them each $0.25 to keep her busy. And I ran in, brushed my hair, put on a fresh blouse, and I went out the front steps. At that time, Evelyn and I looked exactly alike. And our glasses were identical. Really, you couldn't tell who you were talking to. So I ran out and yelled, Howard, you brought it! The truck's here! And there was this beautiful, beautiful, deep blue Ford pick-em-up truck. Oh my gosh, it was astounding. Boy, did I want to get my hands on that wheel. Oh, you're going to let me drive it? His grin was as wide as the river. Sure, but let me show you around first. And he took me by the elbow and he guided me around the front and we admired the grill together and we kicked the tire, literally kicked the tires together. Oh my gosh, it was beautiful. He showed me the back of it and he showed me exactly where he was going to put his toolbox when he saved the money to get that in there. He was so excited and so thrilled. We opened and closed the tailgate together a couple of times. Oh my gosh, that new truck smell. Oh, there's nothing better than a new car smell to a teenager. I was in love. And just as he put his arm under my elbow and helped me step up on that little running board thing they used to have and into his truck, out the front door, ran Evelyn with a brush in one hand and a hairspray can in the other, yelling, my arm, glared at me. Oh, was he mad? He started turning red. You know how some people who are lighter colored start turning red at the bottom of their neck and it works all the way up their face? And his eyes were fiery and his mouth was set. And he said, "Are you Francis?" I said, "Hey, Howard, it was just a joke." And I bolted for the front door. She was screaming at me. She followed me into the house saying things Mom and Dad don't allow us normally to say. And I just ran to the back room and curled up in a ball and laughed and laughed and laughed and laughed. And then it wasn't more than 10 minutes till the two of them took off. It took Howard over a month to say hello to me. He never invited me out to the farm again. As for Evie, it just took her a couple of weeks. And then she was laughing about it too. So those are the tricks I play as a mischievous teenager. You know
For
what?
sure.
Thank God she still loves me.
And I always will.
Oh,
That's good.
well, Fran.
That's,
Thanks, Evie.
oh,
I enjoyed the journey.
too fun. Oh, look, I never did this. I see it says reactions. I wish I had a sister that I could have done something like that too. My sister was 7 years older, so, you didn't get to do that kind of thing.
Yeah, an identical twin is. I'm sure we could go on all evening talking about twin trouble.
Yeah.
Against
Twins.
against each other and then together. I mean, quite powerful. Thank you, Fran.
Evie, did you enjoy that story?
Oh, definitely. I was sitting here remembering it all again. I even got a little bit angry about Howard.
It's okay, Ev.
Okay. Our last teller for the first half is Marnie Gillard from Schenectady. She's going to share with us a literary story by Eve Bunting. And her colors are very variegated gray and white. And the story is called The Man Who Could Call Down the Owls. Marnie, over to you.
You, Kate. I want to show you that this is a beautiful picture book by Eve Bunting, but the illustrations by Charles Mikolajczyk were very, very well received. It was right up there next to the Caldecott Award. And I had the opportunity to meet Eve Bunting, and I had loved this story. And it was a funny experience that I was at a teacher conference and she had been speaking and we were all kind of sitting around admiring her. A lot of people knew her work. And one lady said, "I didn't like that story about the owls and the owl man. That was way too dark for children." And I loved that story. And I stood right up and said, "I'm a storyteller who loves that story. And now I'm going to tell it even more and bring it to the world." And Eve Bunting looked at me like, it was just quiet at that moment. We talked later, but at that moment, she looked at me like, "Thank you. Not everyone is going to, it was just a look. Not everyone's going to love what you write, but your words mean a lot to me." And then we did have a lovely chat afterwards. And she said, "Oh, please keep telling it." So here it is. Once there was a man who could call down the owls. He had a beautiful white cloak that flowed when he walked, and a broad-brimmed hat. And he carried a willow wand in his hand. Now, every night he would walk into the woods, and a scattering of villagers would always follow after. But it would be nighttime. Some had little candles they took, or something of a torch to keep the light in the woods, but they were very, very quiet, following the man into the woods. And always, always, there was the boy, Khan, a young boy who came with his baseball cap and his little jacket. And I don't know if he had any light that he was carrying, but he loved watching the man. But all the people were quiet as the man with the cloak and the broad-brimmed hat stepped into the first clearing. Everything was silent, but he raised his willow wand to the night sky. And the owls came. They came swooping on noiseless wings to perch on his shoulders, to perch on his hat, to perch on all the branches closest to where he came. Now, by day, the man would be in his owl barn. There were wings to be mended or legs to be splinted. And always Khan came to the owl barn too. Oh, how do the owls find you? How do they know about you? And how do you get them to come? He was always asking questions. And the man said, they find me. They find me. They know I'm here and I can help them. Oh, I wish I knew about the owls the way you do. You know so many things about them. How will I ever learn it all? And the man smiled at young Khan and said, watch and listen, and you will learn. You will learn. And after that, Khan started coming closer and standing beside the man, even when all the villagers were back and silent. But when the man would come into the clearing, Khan was there. Now still, it was very quiet. And the man would raise his wand, and the owls would come on noiseless wings and perch all about him. Khan might whisper, what kind is that? Barno. The man would say, and his voice sounded like the wind. What is that in your hat? It looked like a tiny little sparrow. And the man reached up and he just gently put his hand around this tiny owl, showed it to the boy and said, elf owl. And then there was a hoot, 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 hoot in the sky. And Khan's eyes got wide. And the man said, look at the great horned owl and his white collar all about him. And Khan was learning and learning and taking it in every detail. Now, one night, a stranger came into the woods definitely not one of the villagers. He didn't know about keeping quiet. He didn't know that the man would go into the clearing alone or just with the boy. And he had a sneer on his face as he watched what happened when the man raised his willow wand. He said, just loud enough for the boy to hear. A man who can command the birds of the air. He has a power. I want that power. Khan, hearing him, turned and said, oh, it's not like that. He's not commanding them. It's not like that. And the man just ignored the boy and sort of brushed him off. Well, the next night, when the villagers came in at the usual time, the man wasn't there, the man who could call down owls. But then suddenly, that stranger who had been there the night before, he strode into the woods, and he was wearing the long cloak, the beautiful white cloak, and wearing the broad-brimmed hat, and carrying the willow wand. And Khan went up and said, how did you get these things? Where's the man who can call down the owls? And the stranger laughed. I talked to him. He gave me them. He said I could have them. And here I am. And watch what happens. And the boy knew, oh no, he wouldn't have given them to that stranger. And the stranger strode right into the center of the clearing, and all the people pulled back. They were afraid. And Khan just watched. And as he pushed his arm up into the air, the owls came, but they came shooting into the night and searing the night with sound. And some caught the stranger's cheek, and it was bleeding. And then others were after his eyes, and all the owls were coming at him. And he dropped the cloak and dropped the hat and ran out of the woods, dropping as well the willow wand. And then everything became silent, and the owls slowly drifted off into the night. But there was one owl, a great white snowy owl, whiter than white, nothing like Khan had ever seen before. And his great wide wingspan covered the clearing. He hovered there for a minute. And then it was like he melted into the moon. And all the villagers looked to Khan, pointing to the wand. He didn't need that big hat. He had his cap. He had his little jacket. And he was a little nervous. But after watching that white snowy owl, something told him the man was the owl. And the man who could call down owls would not return. And so, young as he was, he picked up the willow wand and he held his breath and he tried to find a peace inside himself. And he gently raised the wand to the night sky. And then, on noiseless wings, the owls came, perching on his cap and on his shoulders and on all the branches round where he stood. They came filling the night with truth and love. The owls came. The Man Who Could Call Down Owls by Eve Bunting.
Very nice. Lovely.
Yeah. Bravo, Marnie.
Teacher.
Oh,
And there's nothing I like more than watching a child grow into a calling. Thanks for listening.
Well, thank you for giving us so many wonderful images. That snowy owl melting into the moon. Yes. Just
that was
beautiful.
riveting. I just learned how to write the comment.
Thanks.
Okay. Well, it's time for a little stretch break, a little intermission. I would like to mention that if you would care to make a donation, the information is here. But we realize that many people have been financially impacted by COVID-19. Any amount you care to donate will be greatly appreciated. Proctor's, the Performing Arts Center, where we normally perform and intend to in the future, is graciously handling the online donations for us. They are also rebroadcasting these performances on their they're rebroadcasting these performances on their Open Stage Media Arts and Education channel. And if you'd like to find out more about this, Claire has already put our address on the internet on chat. And at the
I'm good. Serious?
And at the top of every page are next shows listed. And then a link to click on for additional events. So starting the second half, we have Sandy Schumann from Albany. He's going to share a legend which called to mind to him the colors blue and gold. It's a legend I've never heard. Maybe you have, but it's the legend of the Paul Bunyan of the Erie Canal. Sandy, do tell.
Well, blue and gold, as I'm sure you are aware, are the official colors of the Erie Canal. And we are celebrating the 200th anniversary of the Erie Canal. Construction spanned from 1817 to 1825, so this will be an 8-year-long anniversary, which will give you plenty of time to read up and learn everything there is to know about the Erie Canal. And you'll come to understand its impact on the New York State economy, why it's known as the mother of cities, its role in the Underground Railroad, immigration, settlement of the Midwest, the formation of the Adirondack Park, all of those interesting, grand impacts. And you may learn also about everyday life on the Erie Canal, a world that was 363 miles long and 40 feet wide. Of course, it was expanded to 70 feet wide. But a culture unto itself. And let me set a scene for you. Some boat captains have gathered at a tavern along the Erie Canal, there to share news, trade little bits of information that will help them in their work and money-making prospects. And as they are chatting and having a drink, one of them brings up his story about Red McCarthy, the legendary boatman known as the Paul Bunyan of the Erie Canal. And so he says, Red McCarthy, he often said time is money, and he took that to heart. He took every opportunity to save a few minutes as he made his way across the canal so he could pick up yet another shipment and another payment. Now, the rest of us, when it came time to change mules, the mules are out there for a 6-hour shift. And when it was time to change, you'd tie your boat up to the side of the canal. You'd get out the hawse bridge, a wooden plank that would extend from the boat to the towpath. And you'd lead the fresh mule from the boat where it had been resting across to the towpath, and you take the worn out mule that had just finished a 6-hour shift, you bring it back. And then of course you'd have to harness up the mule and bring the hawse bridge back onto the boat. And all that took time. Well, Red McCarthy didn't want to waste that time making those changes, so he taught his mules how to tightrope walk. And when it came time to change, he just pull on the tow line, make it tight, and the mules would just tiptoe across. It was much faster than the hawse bridge. Now, I wanted to have mules like that, so I tried to train my own mules, but I couldn't do it. I didn't know how to train them, not like McCarthy did. So I offered to buy one, but McCarthy wouldn't hear of it. So I stole one. Well, I tried to steal one. You see, I knew better than to approach one of those mules from behind, because I might get one of those mule kicks. So I came at it from the side. But he taught his mules how to kick sideways, and that's why I have this limp. Now, you have to appreciate that in the American tall tale tradition, these stories are not funny. They weren't trying to bring out a laugh, but rather an inner chuckle. And they tried to outdo each other in their exaggeration of the comic lie. And so the next captain took up the story, and he told of a time when he was on the canal and driving his boat, and there was a break on the wall, and it had eroded into the towpath, and the repairman there, the hurry-up boat, was there fixing the towpath. And he tied up alongside, waiting for them to finish the repair, and a couple other boats came up and tied up. Well, Red McCarthy came up the towpath driving his mules, and he was not wanting to wait for any repair. When he saw what was going on, he just jumped over to the other side of the canal. This is back when the canal was only 40 feet wide, mind you. And so he just jumped right over, and then he realized he couldn't keep going without the mules. He jumped back over to the towpath side, grabbed the mules, jumped back over again, kept hauling. As soon as he passed the hurry up boat and could get back on the towpath, jumped back over and kept on going to Buffalo. Well, the towpath work crew was not real happy about this, because with those jumps, he had depressed the towpath some, and not only did they have to fix the break in the towpath, they had to level it up where he'd made those jumps. Well, another boat captain chimes in. Well, he was a very strong fellow. And, you know, I used to be a lock tender. And I remember one time McCarthy was in my lock waiting for me to open the downstream gate and release the water. And he was tied up there on the lock. And I did lower the water, but I forgot to sound the warning horn, and I caught him unawares. And he saw his boat starting to tilt, one side tied to the canal and the other side drifting down with the water. It would tear his boat apart. Well, he had to think quick. He grabbed a couple of lines and lassoed the cleat on the opposite side, and pulled that boat up to hold it level so it wouldn't break in two. And he called out, he said, "Caleb, now see here. The water underneath my boat has seemed to gone. Suppose maybe you could put some back in there." Well, I did my best to close the lower gate as fast as I could and refill that water. I thought, sure, McCarthy was going to come over and pinch my head off, but he didn't hold a grudge. Of course, the fact that I gave him all the money that I had and a bottle of whiskey and my Jew's harp, that might have had something to do with him settling down. Well, with that, another boat captain comes in and he says, well, you know, I heard that McCarthy was driving his boat west. He really couldn't see ahead of him. He's driving those mules and he couldn't see the arses of those mules in front of him, by gosh. And all of a sudden the tow line went slack. He feels ahead. He can't feel the mules. They've taken off and he's not going to even attempt to chase them down in all that fog. So he picks up the tow rope over his shoulder and he starts hauling. And his boat is loaded with crushed stone. It's a heavy load. Well, he just kept going down the towpath. His crew never noticed the difference. He made that haul 7 miles from Pendleton to Rochester. Little did he know that his boat had sprung a bit of a leak and it was dragging on the bottom of the canal. He dug the canal 2 feet deeper for those 7 miles. Afterwards, the Canal Commission awarded him $500 for doing that service, and that's when he retired. Yeah, I heard about that, says another boater. I heard about that and I offered to buy that boat from him after he retired. I offered him a pretty good price, but he got a better deal. You see, he hauled that boat out of the water and turned it over. And the bottom was polished smooth. He sold it to the town of Camillus as a dance floor. Well, he did retire, and that $500 and the money he made on the boat sale, he spent it pretty good. And then he was looking for money. And I saw him at the Madison County Fair. There was a wrestling contest and they had a pretty good prize pot. But in order to win the prize money, you had to take your opponent and lift him up over your head for a 10 count, the referee's 10 count. Well, a couple of men got in there and They weren't successful. None of them could get their opponent up over their head, much less for a 10 count. Well, McCarthy saw the opportunity to make a few bucks, and so he entered the ring. And he invited all comers. But nobody would accept the challenge from McCarthy. Well, he wanted that money, so he held himself up over his head for the 10 count. You know, the judges weren't going to give him the payout because they said he didn't have an opponent. But he gave him such a look. They paid up. Well, one of the captains says, you know, we've been stretching the wind here so long. I see my boat's all packed and ready to go, and my crew's waving to me, so I better get going. And that's the story of Red McCarthy, Paul Bunyan of the Erie Canal. I didn't crack a smile.
No, you didn't. No.
It was
You know,
it's the inner chuckle.
inner chuckle. Yes. And you know, I think I feel a little taller. You've been pulling my legs for what was that, 5-10 minutes?
Who's counting?
Thank you, Sandy. Our next teller is Priscilla Sprague. She's telling the third personal story you'll be hearing today. And her choice of color was all of them, was rainbow. Priscilla, please tell us, truth is weird.
Hi, everybody. I spent the first 11 years of my life in a small village called Orchard Park, New York. And my family and my grandparents and aunts and uncles and so on lived there. And so I knew the town or the village, and my parents had gone to school there, and a lot of the shopkeepers had their stores there. So everybody knew everybody, and if a kid got lost, they were immediately discovered and found and taken back and so on. And there were 3 churches. One down the road from my grandmother was the Catholic Church, and they were right across the street from Aunt Tony. And then there was the church right across the street from my grandmother, and that was the Presbyterian Church. And then there was a Quaker meeting house, but I don't remember where it was because it was a house. And I feel badly, but I don't remember. Well, we were Presbyterians. And so sometimes we would go visit my grandmother right before church, and she would be getting ready and all that. And then we would all go across together, and sometimes we would meet with her after. And this day, my daddy and I went to church, and we sat in the 3rd row back. We always did. That's where we sat. We sat by the window, and there were windows on the other side, but I never sat over there. And we waited, and the service was kind of boring for a kid. I was about 5. And this day, it was nice and sunny out. So I could swing my feet and look outside, and that helped the time go by. Plus, I had new shoes. They were black and all shiny. And I figured out that if I kicked my feet, that the light would come and shine on my shoes. Well, I had a really great time kicking back and forth. We had a minister named Mr. Irving. Mr. Irving was a great guy, and I really liked him. They would come, he and his wife would come to the house and have dinner with us a lot, and they were fun. I liked him. Well, on Sunday mornings, he wore a robe, and it was all pretty going down the front. It was all black, and it had wings. I'll show you. Right here, there would be kind of a thing going around. And then there was this huge amount of cloth. And there was one on the other side too. And sometimes he would hold out his arms and the cloth would wave a little. And I really, really wanted him to fly, but I didn't see it. My cousin Charles saw it. He said he saw him fly, but not me. So this day, I was looking at the church and there was a step up and then there were these sort of towery things, and Mr. Irving would climb up in one of them and talk to us. He would tell us a story. Well, I thought really what they were tree houses. So he'd climb up in his tree house, and then there was another one on the other side for somebody else to read. So Mr. Irving got up, and I was swinging my feet and looking at my shoes and looking outdoors. And in the middle of the story, Mr. Irving flings his arms out, and I thought, oh, this is it. Hooray. Oh, wow. And he said, God is here. So I pulled on my dad's jacket, and I wasn't allowed to bother him during church. I wasn't allowed to talk. I had to be good. Well, if God was there, I had to be really good. So I didn't pull on his jacket again, but I wanted to know, where is God? Well, nobody was getting up and yelling and screaming and saying, yay, God's here. No one paid much attention to that. And I thought, well, where is he? And I thought, well, maybe they were all waiting because we were having a party after church, because sometimes we did that. I looked past my daddy. No. I looked out the window in case he was taking a walk. No. I looked up on the first level where the tree houses were, and I looked over to see if he was behind Mr. Irving. No. Or behind the other one either. Oh, maybe underneath. So I climbed down onto the floor, and I looked, and they had a lot of shoes. They were great. They had mommy shoes and daddy shoes, and some of the mommy shoes were really fancy, and I really liked shoes. So I looked, and I didn't see God. And I knew what God looked like, because back in the hall where they had the parties was this big picture, and there was a big picture. There were these clouds and these little things, I think angels, and then God was wearing a white outfit, and he had white beard, he had white hair, and then there were some more clouds. So I looked for somebody, maybe without the clouds, but I looked and there wasn't there. So I looked up in the choir. No. So I thought, well, maybe he's out back where the bell was. I used to get to swing on the bell, on the rope for the bell. No God. So, up front, right near the chairs where some fancy people would sit, was this big piece of cloth hanging there. So I figured God was back there, sort of in a little room with this big chair and everything. I was so excited. So I said to my daddy, after Mr. Irving walked down the aisle, I said, would you take me up there and show me? He said, sure. So we went up, we went through the chairs and got to the back, and I I reached out and I pulled up the cloth. There was a wall there. Oh, I said, Daddy, where's God? And he said, well, I think that's a good question for Mr. Irving. So we walked down the aisle. We were the last people in line. And I said to Mr. Irving, Mr. Irving, I was holding on to his wing. And he said, Priscilla, what would you like? And I said, I want to know, where's God? He said, well, God is everywhere. But you said he was here today. Well, yes, he's always here. What? So he said, God is everywhere. And yes, he's here. Well, I can't find him. Oh, well, we can't see God. I was looking. Mr. Irving said, I saw you looking. And I said, well, how do you know he's here? Well, he's always here. And I thought, I don't like that. I want to see him. He said, well, right now you're a girl and you're going to grow up and you're going to become a woman and you're going to be an adult. And adults ask these questions a lot. So what I think is maybe Daddy will bring you to my office and we can talk and I'll keep talking with you about this. This is really important. And I said, okay, Mr. Irving, but you know God is here? He said, yes. So I let go of his wing and we left the church. This story is a true story as far as I can remember. And so that's the truth part. And the other part of the story is, ask yourself, where's God? Is God? What's he like? And you can tell yourself a truth or a lie.
Thank you so much, Priscilla. You really let us look through your child eyes. I love the wings. Oh, and the tree houses. I feel the next time I go into the church, I will look to see if they have 1 or 2 tree houses. Oh, and I won't think that's weird at all. No. Right. Okay, now we're in for a unique treat today. We have a myth, and it's a Norse myth. Claire Nolan will be sharing that with us. It's called The Building of the Wall of Asgard. And the colors she chose for her story are silver and gold. Claire.
Thank you, Kate. And oh, Priscilla, thank you for that beautiful story. And it's possible that many of you might know that some gods are located in a place called Asgard. And Asgard is the home of the Norse gods, and maybe you're familiar with some of them. Odin, of course, the All-Father, and Loki, the trickster. Thor, the thunder god with his mighty hammer, and Freya, the beautiful, and perhaps vain, and oh my goodness, so many more, Nana, and who has such love for everyone. Idun with her apples, the apples that keep the gods young. Mm. So as I said, they all live in this place called Asgard. And Asgard is, well, it was surrounded by a wall that the gods themselves had made at the beginning of time, a wall of silver and gold. But there had been a war, and the wall had been demolished, and the gods felt vulnerable in this unwalled place. They were protected by the bridge, the rainbow bridge they called Bifrost. And that bridge was guarded by Heimdall. And of course, they were protected by Thor and his mighty hammer. But Thor was not always at home. The gods talked often of rebuilding the wall, making a new wall around their city, but it was all talk. They never actually got around to building that wall. And once, when Thor was far away fighting the frost giants and the trolls, a man came across the Bifrost Bridge, and he rode his black stallion right into Asgard. And he rode right up to Odin's hall. And Odin greeted him and welcomed him into his hall. "What do you want here, stranger?" And the man said, "Gather the gods and goddesses, and I will tell you what I have come for." And so Odin called them all together into his great hall. And when they were all there, the man spoke. He said, "I have come to offer you a wall. I will build a wall for you, a wall that will be so tall that no giant will be able to climb over it. It will be so thick and strong that no troll will be able to break through it. It will be built so well that not even the tiniest of ants can get through that wall." "Oh," they said, "this sounds like a magnificent wall, a wall that we need around Asgard to protect us." And Odin, the Allfather, said, "Tell us, stranger, what is your price for this magnificent wall that you offer?" "I'm not finished," he said. "This wall that I will build for you, I will build it in 18 months. I will build it that quickly. You will have your wall." "And your price?" "Not much," he said. "Only the hand of the beautiful Freya in marriage." And Freya sat up in her chair and she looked at the other gods. Are they listening to this? This is madness. But Odin could sense that the man wanted more. "And what else?" he said. "I ask for Freya in exchange for this wall that I would build for you. And I ask you for the sun that shines by day and the moon that shines by night. That is my price, no more, no less." And all the gods began to shout and call out at once, "How dare he come into the hall and demand such a price?" And Freya held on to her necklace, her beautiful necklace that shone like the northern lights against her white skin. And she closed her eyes. Was she hearing this? Surely they would take this man out, beat him for his effrontery, and send him back across the bridge where he had come from. There was a lull in the shouting, and during that lull, a dry cough was heard. It was one of those coughs that means that someone has something to say, something to add to the conversation. And they looked around, and there was Loki, the trickster. And he said, "Perhaps, friends, we should listen to what this man has to say." Freya looked at Loki in astonishment. Loki, the trickster, Loki, the con man, Loki, the grifter of the gods. How dare he even consider this offer? "Are you mad, Loki?" she said. And she remembered Loki's many treacheries against the gods. She remembered how he had changed himself into a little fly, and that little fly came into Freya's own chamber, and that little fly himself into a seal who dove out into the fjord near her castle, never to be seen again until Heimdall went and rescued her beautiful necklace and returned it to her. Oh, she and Loki were not friends. But Loki said in a calm In a rational and a reasonable voice, he said, "Friends, why don't we let this good man get some rest and some food? Why don't we let him take his horse to the stable where it can be groomed and fed? And then we can talk in private." And so the stranger led his horse away. And the gods and the goddesses gathered around Loki, who said, "Listen to this offer. We need a wall. This man has come to offer to do the impossible. Let's let him try. And maybe he'll build part of a wall in 18 months, but certainly not an entire wall. And then we won't have to pay him anything, and we'll have part of a wall that we just have to complete. It's a wonderful opportunity." Freya just shook her head. Had he gone mad? But the other gods were listening, much to Freya's disgust. And they said, "Really, Loki, you think that it's impossible? I know it's impossible. The man could never build this wall that he describes in 18 months. Odin said, "What if we offer him 6 months, 1 season? Tomorrow is the first day of winter. If he can build this wall by the first day of summer, then he can have Freya, the sun, and the moon. But as Loki said, it is impossible." And then Loki said, "We'll add more to the conditions. He can only have 6 months and no one to help him. He must work alone." And the other gods and goddesses nodded their heads. Oh, this was going to be perfect. No one could build a wall in 6 months, not a wall around all of Asgard, not a wall like this man had described. And Loki, the trickster, the con man, the shapeshifter, had his way. They called the man back into the great hall and they offered him. They said, "You can have Freya." Freya snorted. "You can have the sun and the moon, but you will only have 6 months to build this magnificent wall, and you can have no one to help you." The man thought a moment and he said, "No one? Not even my horse? Surely you will let me have my horse to help me." And the gods conferred for a few minutes and they decided that yes, a man could use his horse to help him in building such a wall. "Well, tomorrow is the first day of winter. I must get started. I must make my preparations." And at midnight, the man set out from the great hall and he went off into the mountains, riding his horse, who was pulling a sled behind them. And he reached the place in the mountains where the rocks were, and he cut great quantities of rocks, and he filled that sled, and the horse brought the sled back in the early morning to Asgard. Loki and the other gods were surprised to see him there, working when they woke up. They hadn't expected to see him come back in a week at least with the rocks, but Loki said not to worry. This is the first night. He's fresh, he's strong, of course. He won't have any problems on the first night. Give him a day or two. He'll tire, he'll slow down. And all that day, that man built that wall, built the foundation of that wall around Asgard with those huge rocks that he and his horse had brought back from the mountains. And he worked cheerfully. He whistled as he worked, and his horse grazed nearby. And each day the gods watched as that wall took shape around their home, around Asgard. And each night the man went off into the mountains with his horse. And each morning he was back again when they awoke with so many rocks, huge rocks, bigger than any of the gods. Bigger even than Thor himself, who still had not returned. And they watched, and the wall grew, and the snow came of winter, and still that man worked. He never tired. He worked through snowstorms and sleet and hail. He worked through night and day. He and his horse never stopped. And he was always happy, always cheerful. He seemed to enjoy this work so much. Day and night passed, month after month. The days started to get longer. The air warmed. Soon the man was pulling and the horse were pulling that sled through mud, but the mud dried and the flowers bloomed. It was coming near to the end of spring and the first day of summer. And this wall, this magnificent wall, was almost finished. The man had only to make an arch for this doorway that he had built in the wall, a doorway that would have a big oaken door to close Asgard off to the rest of the world. The other gods and goddesses were getting very nervous. And they spoke to Loki. They said, Loki, this was your idea. The man is almost finished. And soon, in just a day or two, it will be the first day of summer and he's almost done. What are you going to do about it, Loki? And Freya, fingering her beautiful necklace, looked at Loki with hatred. How dared he do this to her? And the other gods said, we'll lose the sun. We'll lose our warmth. We'll lose the moon, our light by night. Loki, you have to do something. And Loki looked around at the gods and said, hey, you all agreed to this. Why is it suddenly my fault? But he knew that it was his fault and he was going to have to do something about it. And that night that was really part of a very long day. The next day would be the first day of summer. That man and his horse headed off into the mountains to get the very last load of stones that he would need to complete that beautiful arch. And the gods watched him go. Off he went with his horse, whistling a happy tune, knowing that the next day he would have his treasures. The beautiful Freya would be his. He would control the sun and the moon. It had been a good bargain that he had made with these gods. And when he arrived at the place to cut the stones, his horse took off to graze while he worked. And when all the stones that he needed were cut and loaded into the sled, he whistled for his horse. But his horse didn't come. And he looked around and he called his horse by name and he whistled again. Never had he had to whistle twice for his horse. But his horse never came. And then he heard a whinny. And he looked up and there was a beautiful gray mare, the most beautiful horse he had ever seen, from its beautiful ears that twitched to its tail. What a magnificent animal. And his stallion had seen that mare also and had gone off after her. And as soon as his stallion was right near that mare, she took off into the forest and his stallion took off after her. And the man shouted, no, come back. You have to come back. We have to bring these rocks back to Asgard. Where are you going? And the man chased after his horse and the mare through the forest, through the mountains. Sometimes the stallion would get so close that he could almost nip her rump, but no. She was too fast for him. They ran and they ran. They ran so that the man was exhausted and could run no further. And he saw that it was getting late and he was going to have to get back to Asgard somehow with these rocks. And so he harnessed himself to the sled and he brought those rocks back to Asgard. He had to get rid of some along the way. It was too heavy a load for him by himself. And when he reached Asgard, it was very late in the day, and the gods were already awake, waiting for him, wondering where he had been. And they saw that he was alone. They saw the small amount of rocks that he had. They watched him work, no longer whistling, no longer smiling. They saw him work slowly, wearily, trying to finish that arch. But it was no good. At the end of the day, at the end of the first day of summer, that wall was not complete. He lost his bargain. And the gods jeered and laughed at him and said, you thought you were so strong. You thought you could do it in 6 months. Well, we have the better of you. We keep our sun, we keep our moon, and Freya stays a free woman here in Asgard. And then across Bifrost, the rainbow bridge, strode a man, a god, tall and strong, his golden hair, his beard shining in the sunlight. He had his hammer and he swung that hammer. He swung it true and he threw it and it hit that builder who was no man, but a frost giant who had grown big and tall and almost caught that hammer before it hit him in the head and struck him dead. Well, the gods had their wall and they looked around for Loki, but Loki was nowhere to be seen. They knew that they could finish that arch. They knew that they could put that oaken door into place, but it took them much longer than it had taken that giant who had disguised himself as a man, as a builder. They waited for Loki for many months. And at last, one day, Loki appeared. He came through that oaken door that they had placed in the wall. And he was leading a cult like none that anyone had ever seen before. It was a lovely gray cult, and it had 8 legs. And this strange cult was walking behind Loki, who was holding his rope. And the cult was looking at Loki as a child might look at his mother, because that's exactly who Loki, the shapeshifter, was. Loki brought that beautiful cult, that 8-legged cult, into Asgard and brought the cult into Odin's hall and presented this horse, this lovely, beautiful horse, to Odin as a gift. It was Odin's favorite horse, faster than any horse the gods had ever seen before. But do you know, if anyone ever mentioned the parentage of that horse, Loki became quiet, didn't want to talk about it. And usually no one mentioned it more than once, because Loki, the trickster, the con man, the grifter of the gods, knew how to make your life very unpleasant. And that is how the gods of Asgard got their wall. The master builder.
Thank you so much, Claire. For a while there, I was thinking the master builder and Red McCarthy might have some some lineage shared. But no, he was a frost giant. So, okay. Yes. So thank you for sharing a myth and that particular myth with us, Claire. I'm the last storyteller. I'm going to be sharing with you a personal story, a new one. The colors that I chose were wispy gray and sky blue. And I call this story Keep Calm and Carry On. I saw one of those signs a few months ago, keep calm and carry on. And I thought, right. In 2020, keep calm and carry on. Between the pandemic and the politics, how can you keep calm and carry on? I thought it was trite, ridiculous, foolish. I was upset. Maybe you've been upset. Some people, when they get upset, turn to prayer. As a storyteller, I turned to the old stories, like myths, not the tall tales, but myths and folk tales. Those stories are so old, they predate books, and they only were able to come to us because every generation found wisdom in them and told them to the next generation to help them with their lives. So there's countless generations that have preserved these myths and folk tales and religious stories for all of us. But this year, I didn't think to look to some old stories to help me. Luckily, this story came to me. Fran Yardley shared this story at the September Storytelling Night at Cafe Lena, broadcast over the internet. There once was a woman who had so many troubles. She couldn't think straight. She almost stopped functioning altogether. When she asked one of her friends, "What can I do? I have all these troubles." Her friend said, "Why don't you pray?" So the woman prayed, and then she fell asleep. She had this dream. She was in this cave. It was gray, it was misty, it was cold, it was damp. She looked for a source of heat or light. There was none. She saw all these gray bundles on the floor, and she didn't know what they were. Suddenly, an old man appeared, and she said, "Excuse me, where am I, and what are these bundles?" "Oh, you are in the cave of troubles. These are the bundles of troubles that everyone carries on their left shoulder. You may put your bundle down." And she looked, and she had never noticed, but yes, she did have a gray bundle on her shoulder. "You can put your bundle down and examine the others. And you can't leave here without a bundle, but you may choose whichever bundle you want." So the woman eagerly put her bundle down and tried the others, and finally she said, this is the one I want." They said, "Oh, you've chosen the one you came with." "I did?" "Yes, look." So she looked at, "Oh, yes, it is my bundle. I guess now at least I know this is the best bundle for me." And she started to say goodbye, but he said, "Oh, before you go, you must look on your right shoulder for your other bundle, for you have a second one." And she did, and this one was made of gold and silver threads woven together. "What is this bundle?" "Ah, that is your bundle of blessings. Open it." So she did, and it was overflowing with blessings. She said, "Oh, yes, that's I always knew that was right, that is a blessing. Oh, it's so good to know I have all these blessings." And she closed it up, put it back on her other right shoulder, and she turned to say to the old man goodbye and thank you, but he had gone. And then she realized she was awake in her bedroom, and it was morning and the sun was shining. So she lay in her bed thinking about her two bundles that she now really knew more about than she ever had before. And then she smiled because she realized she was feeling something she hadn't felt in a long time. She was feeling the warmth of the morning sun on her face. She hadn't noticed that when she was overwhelmed with her troubles. But now she could feel it, and she continued to smile. Oh, that story. Oh, I was so glad Fran had told that story. Now, I had heard a version of that story, but it always ended with just the one bundle, the bundle of troubles. And the woman had picked up the one that best suited her. It was her bundle of troubles, but she realized everyone had troubles. These were hers to carry. But I never knew about the bundle of blessings. Oh, I knew I had blessings. But I never thought of these terms. And so as I was thinking of my bundle of troubles and my bundle of blessings, I realized something very strange. That some of my troubles caused some of my blessings. For instance, one of my big troubles I've been carrying for a long time is in the decade between when I was 32 and 42. Each of my parents died of cancer, and my best friend was killed in an automobile accident. Trouble, right? But that trouble propelled me to storytelling. I wanted to share their stories. I wanted to create stories about them so I would never forget them. And I'd always remember the way I felt about them, because I knew with time, you forget things. And especially I wanted to create stories about my parents because my father died before my son was born, and my mother died when he was only 2. So the only way he would have any knowledge of my parents is if I told him stories about them. And then there was another trouble that, well, 11 years after my best friend was killed, the company that I had been working for 25 years decided they would prefer to go on without me. But that meant I could devote all my time to storytelling, which by then I realized was my vocation. So as I was thinking about troubles and blessings and which are which, I remembered this story. A long time ago in China, there was a man who had a grown-up son. They lived together. He was a very wise man, but that didn't mean they were wealthy. No, they just had one horse, a mare. One day, the mare ran off, and the wise man's neighbors came and said, "Oh, we are so sorry to hear about the disaster that has happened to you." They said, "Oh, you think this is a disaster? It might be a blessing." And since he was a wise man, they didn't argue with him, but they went away thinking, how can losing your only horse be a blessing? But several weeks later, the mare came back with a stallion. The neighbors rushed over and said, "Oh, what a blessing. Now you have 2 horses." But the wise men said, "It could be a blessing, but it might be a disaster." And again, they went, how could that be a disaster? Time passed. The son decided to try to tame the stallion, and he jumped on the stallion's back, and the stallion threw him off, and the young man's leg was broken very badly, and it never mended well. He always limped, and it was a painful limp. When the neighbors heard that, they came over and said to the wise men, "We are so sorry to hear about this disaster with your son and his leg." He said, "It might be a disaster, but it might be a blessing." And they went, "Blessing? How?" Well, in a few months, there was a war, and all the able-bodied young men from that village had to go off and fight in the war. Very, very few of them returned. But the young man with the painful limp, he lived, and he and his father took care of each other. Some people say in China, you can never tell if it's a blessing or a disaster until you get to the end of the story. So now I'm thinking about my bundles and that last story and how it goes back and forth, and that sign came into my mind. And I realized that was exactly what I need to do. Yes, I intend to keep calm and carry on with my bundle of troubles and my bundle of blessings. And I'll just keep on and carry on as I travel to the end of my story. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. Great, great.
Thank you all. Now, would you all share a round of applause or virtual applause for all of our tellers who shared truths and lies in many shapes and forms today? And we want to thank all of you for coming in out of the beautiful fall weather and joining us here. That I'd like to remind you that we are just in the middle of our 14th season of word plays. Our next word play is Courage on November 8th.